Actually, before we get to the Hobbit... before we get to the Pig Hunter, there's a story about the house Hobbit. There's a Hobbit that lives in the garden. He hangs about the house all day, sweeping, hosing, hammering, pissing in every corner. He's not a bad Hobbit, he's friendly enough, but who needs a friendly Hobbit when all you want to do is write? He loves to tell me stories that make my tits wobble, stories about rapists, snakes, and deadly mosquitoes. Last night he told me a story about a friend of his who has the dreaded dengue fever, and about the European tourists with virgin flesh who come back from the bush with their legs bitten and swollen like grapefruits. I know why he was telling me these stories. It was horror attacks. Because yesterday he offered to drive me around to knock on doors and gather clients. He made me a baked dinner and gave me a smoke, but he gave away much more niceness than he had inside him. So today he sent the bill. It came at 7:30 a.m. without warning. It pelted on my roof, wet my washing and flooded the passageway with water, like the Cape York version of shock and awe. It's been going on now for almost 3 hours. He's even kindly hosed the loathed neighbour's garden. It's got nothing to do with wanting the roof clean. He just likes making a racket while holding his hose. This is why all men should have a job, because men who don't work don't get fucked, and men who don't get fucked just want to start wars. Yeah, he was a sort of slave, that house Hobbit, because the woman who was his girlfriend, she owned the house, and he lived in the garden. And none of those people around me, I all feel as though they're part of this now. This one's godmother's. So I'm wandering through the markets on the esplanade of Cairns, and I'm feeling a little lost. I'm wondering how I'm going to earn money up here and where I'm going to live next. And I'm wearing my I Am My Own Wife baseball cap, which I bought at the Off-Broadway show about 4 years ago, and nobody knows it's an off-Broadway show. They just think it's a statement, which it is. And I come across a store full of little girls' clothing, all handmade by this local Filipino woman, and I go through the beautiful dresses on the rack, thinking of my much-loved goddaughter. And the woman who owns the store starts talking to me. She tells me there's another woman in the store next to hers who sells them cheaper, but that woman imports her clothes from China, whereas she buys local fabric and sews a blessing into every frock. And as I bury my nose in her sweet baby clothes, I can feel it. Then I take off my sunglasses, and as soon as she sees my eyes, she says, "Life is suffering." Just like that. And then she tells me about her 2 children that she had with an Indian guy who took her 2 children away from her. She said I could not fight him. I didn't have the money or the strength. But my godmother told me, let go of those babies. If you fight him, you will end up hurting them. So now she lives every day with the suffering of losing her children, but she puts her love for them into every single frock. And as she sews, she imagines that the child who is wearing her creation will be safe from all the bad things in the world. Don't listen to anyone, she told me. Only listen to your inner godmother. If you find her, she'll protect you. She will open your third eye, and you will see the way to go. I don't make any plans, she tells me. Just let your godmother lead you to where you're supposed to go. Then she asks me what I want, and I tell her I want a publishing deal for my book. She says, forget books, they're a waste of time. But I figure she only says that because she's not a reader. But on the other hand, she could be right. So as I'm cycling home, I'm thinking about my real godmother, Auntie Molly. She's on the other side now, but I imagine she's riding with me. I remember everything about Auntie Molly, how I once hid in her cupboard and watched her get dressed. I always wanted to bury my head in her cleavage. She liked to drink and go to musicals and theatre, and she smelled of perfume and sex. She was divorced, which was a shameful thing in her day, and she raised her son by working as a dressmaker. I found Auntie Molly endlessly fascinating. She was a totally different type of woman to my mother. To quote Anne Summers, she was the damned whore to my mother's God's police. We're talking archetypes. She took me to my first pantomime at the Balmain Leagues Club, which was my first experience of the magic of theatre. When I did my first play at the new theatre, she sat in the front row and had a seizure just before the 15-minute call. That was probably the CIA. That was probably ASIO. They probably used their heart attack machine on her. I never forget it. She got dragged out of the theatre screaming, "But I want to see the show!" So traumatic. We had to wait to start the show while they carted her off in an ambulance. I was never very close to her because she moved around a lot, and my mother liked to keep her chickens close to the nest. It wasn't until Annie Molly died that I realized how important she was. And move along, move along. It wasn't until Auntie Molly died that I realized how important she was and how much colour and movement she brought into my sheltered life. And as I grew up and discovered that I was less God's police and more damned whore archetype, I found it perfectly poetic that she was chosen as my godmother. Although I never got to tell her this before she died, I tell her now because I know that she's listening. I know that she's listening because I talked to her on the ride home. And when I got home, I got a phone call from a contact that I met while sitting in the sauna at the health club where I do my yoga. He was looking for an MC for a domestic violence conference, and I have a meeting with him next week. He was another Mason. See, all these things I thought were miracles. None of them were miracles. They were Masons. M was not for miracle, it was for Mason. And you know where they lead you to a ritual sacrifice. That's it. I am Goyim to them. And then later on, as I was hanging out on MySpace, Vix, another spook, turned up to say g'day and invite me to come and play with her on Facebook. And when I arrived, I discovered that Vix had waved her magic Photoshop wand and, like a fairy godmother, had put 21st Century Showgirl on a billboard at Times Square. If you believe anything can happen. It was as though all my godmothers, living and dead, had united to send me a message. Follow your bliss. I was like, when I look back at all the messengers in this book, they're all bullshit artists. All the people who were supposed to be my friends, they weren't really my friends. They were my watchers, they were my, handlers, basically. And I was under really, really heavy programming. And the satanic stuff, it comes through. It comes through in my stories. Like, where do you hear the story in the pole dancing club? But that's enough for now. I'll be back. Praise the Lord.